This is a beautiful place to be this morning. You know, when everybody comes together and begins to serve the Lord in a spirit of humility and love, amazing things can happen. That's what the church is all about, to display to this world that people can get along, right? And honor Him. And He's the one that keeps us together. This morning, I want to invite you to turn with me to the 32nd chapter of the book of Genesis. I ask for your prayers this morning that the Lord will help me through this. We're living in a time when there's lots of people that consider themselves Christians. There's a lot of people that consider themselves Christians, but oftentimes it's not really displayed very much in their life. Sometimes we've forgotten that we are strangers and pilgrims in this world, and we've settled down and we've settled for less. That great commission that Jesus gave to the church, go into all the world and make disciples, sometimes becomes faint echoes. The desire that the Apostle Peter said that as newborn babes desire the sincere milk of the Word. Sometimes we find that there are many that have a greater appetite for the things of this world. I don't know exactly where everybody's at. I can only account for myself. But I do know the Scripture says this in Romans 13:11, and that knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. For now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. Now, as we begin to consider the Christian life and consider those that consider themselves Christians, there are many that have maybe gone through some motions and done some different things, but they're not really Christians at all. Maybe they haven't been born again. Maybe they haven't been saved by God's grace, because when you come to meet the Lord, it's going to change your life. Amen. It's going to change your life. Amen. If you have an encounter with God, you will be changed. John the Baptist said that to us. He said, if anybody wants to come down to these waters, you need to show forth the evidence of a changed life, that repentance has taken place in your life before you ever need to get in these waters, because these waters are not going to do you any good. Jesus said there to those that maybe have been professors of being a Christian but not really possessing it, He said there in Matthew 7:22 and 23, many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in Thy name, and in Thy name have cast out devils, and in Thy name done many wonderful works? And then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you that work iniquity. And so there are some that may profess that they are Christian, they have a Christian life, but maybe they just went through some motions and said a prayer after somebody, and really it hasn't changed their life whatsoever. They really didn't pray through. The second side of this is that as we look at the church sometimes, that we see those that have been saved by God's grace, but they're more acting like Jonah. You remember what Jonah did, right? He was on the run. He was on the run from what the Lord would have him to do. And over in Jonah chapter 1 and verse 6, it says, what meanest thou, O sleeper? Arise, call upon thy God. If so be that God will think upon us, that we perish not. So we know that there's some that truly have been saved by God's grace, but they have been lulled to sleep in this world. They've been on a run away from the Lord, but that's not the way that God intends us to walk out this Christian life. And so this morning, as we go back to the beginning, I want us to look at a man who had an encounter with God. You know, we need a fresh encounter with the Lord, don't we? That's what this week has been all about, is that we might draw near unto God. And so as we look at this man, I want you to consider the type of man that he was. This man had been on the run. He had been a cheater. He had been a schemer. He had been a manipulator and a liar. But God would mold him into a mighty man of faith and change his life. The man's name is Jacob. God wanted his heart, and He wrestled with him. And it had an impact on his life. And as we read here in Genesis chapter 32 and verse 31 is the verse that I want to take my thought out of this morning. It says, and as he passed over Penuel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh, or he limped. Do you know that when Jacob had an encounter with God, after wrestling with Him that night, that God gave a visible change to him? Yeah. He touched his hip socket, and we see Jacob limping the next morning. Now, the title of this message is going to be Jacob's Limp, a walk that changes your life. If you have had an encounter with God, God has had to show you that it's not by your power, nor by your might, nor by your ingenuity, nor by any other thing that you have to offer that God is able to accomplish His purposes through you, but you've got to become dependent upon Him. Jacob had to learn that lesson. This is a hard lesson for us to learn. The other day I was on the road, and as many of you they've asked me about Nashville, and I live in Nashville now, and the other day I was trying to get from point A to point B up I-65, and all of a sudden traffic starts backing up and there's no exit in sight. And I began to sit there, and I'm thinking, Lord, I've got to get this done, and I've got to get this done. I've got to get this stuff done. I've got to get this done for my boss, and all of these things that I've got to get done. And God stopped me right there on the interstate, and I had no ability to do anything else. You know, sometimes God stops us and God slows us down. That's not a bad thing. Those distractions oftentimes are God's pauses. He pushes pause like we have on those VCRs or DVRs. And He pushes pause and say, hey, I just want to, it was an opportunity. I was sitting there, there was a moment that I was about to get frustrated. I was about to get angry, and I was about to say, I've got to get all these things done. And then when I get home, I got to get all these things done. And I just sat there. This morning, as we consider Jacob's limp, as we look at his life, I want us to learn a few lessons from him. And I want us to look at the ladder, the limp, and learning to lean. The ladder, the limp, and learning to lean. You see, Isaac and Rebekah were married, and they had prayed. She was barren and unable to have any children. It said that Isaac entreated the Lord and prayed that God would bless them with children. I believe that was another pause. Just like Abraham had a pause, God had given him a promise and said, this is what I'm going to do in your life. But Abraham said, you've given me all these promises, but you've given me no child. Abraham had to learn to quit depending on that flesh. That flesh got him in trouble when he got with Hagar and they had a child. The flesh will always get us in trouble when we allow ourselves to try to accomplish God's purposes in the flesh. And so God had put a pause in Abraham's life. Well, Isaac gets married to Rebekah, and one of the natural things that we often think is going to transpire and is going to happen is that you have children. In my life, I thought that's what was going to happen. You get married and you have children. Well, God put a pause in me and my wife's life, and we lost the first one. And He said, pause, you're going to have to trust me on this one. It was a place of brokenness. You know, I believe God wants us to get to a place of brokenness where we realize, God, you've got to be the one to pick up the pieces, and you've got to be the one to put this thing together, because I'm not smart enough, I'm not strong enough, I can't figure all these things out. But if I'll just trust you and I'll lean on you, that's really where you want me to stay. And so Rebekah was barren, and Isaac began to pray, and God blessed them with children, and she began to feel the rustling in the womb, and this was before the days of ultrasound. They had no ability to be able to put a machine on her to say, hey, what is going on in your stomach? I can imagine it was churning, and she began to pray to the Lord. I'll tell you, He provides the greatest ultrasound. He can tell you exactly what's going on, and He told Rebekah that two nations are striving in your womb together. They're striving. God told him that. And so we see that two peoples will come from within you, and the one will be stronger than the other. But we see Jacob here, that this one, we get a picture of his life, that even as he's coming out of the womb, he's the second one to come out, and he's grabbing Esau's heel. So his name is Jacob. He's known as the supplanter. He's the one known as the heel grabber, and we'll find that he eventually is going to be one that's going to turn into a mighty deceiver. Now Esau, he is kind of a man's man. He's an outdoorsman. He's a hunter. He likes to go out there and hunt and catch game and do those things and bring that game home to provide those meals for Isaac that he loved. But Jacob was more of a quiet man. He was a mama's boy. He stayed inside that home quite a bit. There's a little bit of favoritism in there. But we see here Jacob began to scheme. Because Jacob has this desire, just like all of us have this desire, that we want to climb up the ladder. We want to see how high we can get in our own power and our own strength. And that's kind of the way Jacob was. And so one day Jacob was there preparing a meal inside that home, and Esau came in, acted like he was about to die. And he said, "Brother, you got to give me some of that porridge or some of that stew that you've been making up." And you see, Jacob has, he's probably had in the back of his mind that if I had been born 2 seconds earlier, I would have received a double portion from my father, because in that day, the firstborn son would receive a double portion of the inheritance. And I can imagine that in the back of Jacob's mind, he thinks that I have been cheated out, but I'm going to find a way to get what I think I deserve. And so he begins to bargain. Esau acts like he's about to die if he doesn't get some food. And Jacob says, "Hey, brother, I'll give you a whole bowl of this stew that I've been cooking up, but you've got to sell me your birthright." Oh, what kind of nature is that of manipulating and deceiving? And all of these ways about us, we see the flesh at work in the life of Jacob. And he ended up getting that birthright. He ended up getting a 2/3 share of his father's inheritance rather than a 1/3 for a very cheap price over a bowl of stew. So he's got some ingenuity about him, doesn't he? He's got some conning about him, doesn't he? But I'll tell you, in order for God to make a mighty man out of him, He's going to have to bring him down low. He's going to have to show him a few things. And so Isaac was old and about to die. And I wonder if it was Rebekah that Jacob learned some of this scheming of, because she overheard the conversation between Isaac and Esau and said, Isaac is about to give that blessing to your brother Esau, but son, I want you to do this. I want you to go and get some stuff and gather it in here. I'm going to cook up your daddy's favorite meal. I'm going to bring it in there, and you're going to go in there, put on Esau's coat, and you're going to slip right in there, and you're going to be the one to receive the blessing. I wonder, sometimes the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. And so we see that sin working itself out in Rebekah's life and showing that favoritism. It's bleeding over into Jacob's life. And so Jacob comes in and he comes before his father. And the father says, "I hear the voice of my son Jacob." But as he began to feel that coat and that hair, Esau was a hairy man. And Isaac was fooled. He couldn't see very clearly. And he said, "Hey, I'm your son Esau." And so you know how the story goes. As he was there, he blessed him and he gave him a great portion. So now we see that Jacob, in his scheming, in his lying, in his manipulation, in his deception, not only has he stolen the birthright, but now he has stolen the blessing. He's been more concerned about these earthly blessings and these earthly material things than he did the things that really matter in life. Esau comes back, and we know what happened then. Just what happens between a lot of brothers. And especially when inheritances get involved. I'll tell you, I want to encourage you, don't allow those things to get entangled in your family. It can drive you away and destroy you if you let those things. You really see things coming out at that point. And Esau came back after killing that animal, and he came back and said to his dad, I've been out there, I've hunted, and his dad said, I've already eaten a meal. What happened? Esau finds out that Jacob has stolen his blessing. He said, "I'm going to kill you." Rebekah quickly decides that, hey, it's probably a good time for you to move off, Jacob. And said, "I want you to go over to my brother's house, to Laban's house." As he's on his way over there, God begins to appear to him. I can imagine he's scared for his life. But as we read over in Genesis chapter 28, something happens in Jacob's life. He sees this ladder. He's been climbing the wrong ladder. So many times we're focused on climbing the wrong ladder. Yeah. So many times we are trying to climb the corporate ladder, and we're trying to get higher up and higher up and higher up. And what we do typically is we begin to sacrifice the things that really matter. Somebody gave me some great advice this week and said, when your sons have a ball game, or somebody has a piano recital, try to go over there and be there at those things instead of just worrying about work and getting up here and getting this done. Because at the end of the day, the money is not what matters the most. But in Jacob's mind, he's scheming, he's deceiving, and he's looking, and he's finagled his way in here to get that double portion of that blessing. But God appears to him in a dream. In Genesis 28, verse 10, it says, "And Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night, because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place and put them for his pillows, and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed a dream, and behold, a ladder set upon the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, the God of Isaac, and the land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south, and in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. And Jacob awake out of sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid and said, How dreadful is this place! This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. I believe Jacob had an encounter with the Lord. At this moment, God had reaffirmed the covenant. He said, I'm not going to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. I'm going to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Jacob. And Jesus later would remind some people, I believe it was Nathaniel, oh, I'll tell you, we've got one mediator. We've got one that can settle the struggles in our life, because Jacob was in the middle of some struggles, and he was going to need some divine help to set these things straight, because he left that home in pride. He left that home not having very much humility. But Jesus says over here in John chapter 1 and verse 51, oh, he makes reference that he is Jacob's ladder. He is that stairway to heaven. He's the one that we need to be walking close to. But Jacob didn't have that in his mind at that moment in time. But it says over here in John 1 and 51, he said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter you shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. And Jesus is the one that can help us climb that right ladder, to draw near to God. You know that all of our lives is really about drawing near to God. It's not just about 1 week of revival. It's really about learning to draw near to Him every single day. And so Jacob has another encounter with the Lord. And just to paraphrase this just for a minute, Jacob had gone to Laban's house, and he had been serving Laban for about 20 years. And once again, Jacob had been blessed. He had been blessed with 2 wives. He had been blessed with 11 sons. He had been blessed with all of these blessings of herds and things as he had worked there for Laban. And Laban he had met his own match when he came into Laban. And I'll tell you, some of these days when we think we can deceive and manipulate and con, I'll tell you, you'll eventually come up and meet your own match. And that's exactly what happened in Jacob's life, because it tells us that Laban changed his wages 10 times in the middle of that. And he even swapped out the daughters that Jacob thought he was going to marry. I'll tell you, we can meet our match if we want to play that game, because there's always going to be somebody bigger and stronger in this life that's going to outdo you. You know, we often think we're big and bad. I used to think that on the basketball court, that I was pretty good, or on the baseball field. But I'll tell you, God was sure to bring me up against some matches that would show me and put me in my place, to show me, hey, you don't have anything on some of these out here. If you're going to fight this way, that's not the right way to fight. But if you want to fight this way, there's going to be somebody out there stronger. And really, Brian, what you need to learn in life is to get weak and to get humble and to realize you need to depend on the Lord. And so we come to this encounter in Jacob's life. he has been mightily blessed of things in this world. As I said, he's got a large family. In those days, a large family was one of the greatest blessings that you could have, because those sons or daughters could be there to help run the home and take care of things. He had been blessed with great herds and great flocks, and God had just poured out blessing on top of blessing. But that's not the type of blessing that Jacob really needed to have. He had been searching for his father's approval all this time, but he really needed God's blessing. He came to a point because God had said, I want you to go back home. You remember when Jacob left home, he left Esau ready to kill him. He said, when my father's dead, I'm going to kill him. Jacob is afraid of his life. If he goes back and fights the same kind of way, it's probably going to be trouble. But there in the middle of the night, it says here, as he was preparing to meet Esau, God, after 20 years, it said, you're going to go back home, Jacob. And it says here in verse 23, and he took them and sent them over the brook and sent them over that he had. He had sent 550 animals he was going to give Esau as a peace offering to try to show him, hey, I know I cheated you out a lot, but I want things to be okay, because at the end of the day, what really matters is that things are right between us and God, and things are right within our families, and things are right within our churches. Isn't that how we want to go out? We want to go out in such a way that we've got peace and harmony in our homes, and those are the type of blessings that money cannot buy. It says there in verse 24, and Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and has prevailed. You see, Jacob was, in much the beginning portion of his life, he was more concerned with power among men, wealth and blessing among men. But he met his match. Said he wrestled with this angel. This is a picture of the pre-incarnate Christ, I believe. I believe he wrestled with Jesus that night. And he, as his name meant, one who is a heel grabber or a deceiver, or one that is a heel catcher. We see that this man had depended on his physical strength, on his own ingenuity, but God was going to bring him to a place of brokenness. You see, God was going to touch him, and He was going to humble him. This was a man that was holding Esau's heel on the way out of the womb. He had cheated Esau out of his birthright. He had deceived his father Isaac and received the blessing. He had deceived Laban, and he was about to come face to face with his brother. But the one he needed to come face to face with was God. He actually names that place Peniel, which means face of God. There that night, as Esau prepares to go, or as Jacob prepares to go visit Esau, God has stripped him of his physical power. He touched that hip socket, and He gave him a limp. You know, this morning, we often are looking for the strong and physical strength. We're looking for the mighty. We're looking for the most knowledgeable. But you know what God really needs and what He's really looking for? He's looking for those who realize that they're weak, but He is strong.
That's right.
God is looking for those who realize, just like this week, we've desired that somebody gets saved. But you know what? We can preach the Word and lay the gospel out as clear as we know how. But it's going to take God to bring down the power from on high to save anybody. Because if Brother Lynn and I could save anybody, somebody else would come along and talk them out of it. I'll tell you, we need the power of God resting on our lives. Jacob had an encounter with God that changed the rest of his life. If you've been saved by God's grace, you've had to come to that same place, haven't you? You've had to come face to face with God. Well, you realize that, hey, I'm not going to win this battle. And you had to come to a place that you had to get to the end of yourself, that, Lord, I can't win this anymore. And you had to come to a place that, God, in some ways, I'm going to wrestle with you until I receive the blessing from on high. I'll tell you, if there's anybody lost in here this morning, you need to get face to face with God and say, God, I'm not going to let go of you until you bless me, that I may have all the things I need in this world. But I'll tell you, the things I need the most is you in my life. I need you to save me from my sin. And I'll tell you, He will give you a walk and it'll change your life. If you ever come to meet Him, there's no way that anybody that's ever truly been saved by the grace of God that has not been changed, it's going to work itself out. The Apostle Paul said that work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for he that comes to God must believe that He is, and He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. I think I got two scriptures mixed up there, but whatever God works in, He's going to allow it to work itself out. It's going to come out, and we see here in Jacob's life, he's got a limp. You know what God did to him? He slowed him down, didn't He? Yeah. Anybody in here got a limp? Anybody in here been slowed down? Yeah. You know, if we're honest, we all have some limps. God has brought things into our lives that have broken us, that have made us realize our weakness. Very uncomfortable things in our lives, aren't they? I remember when I thought that I was going to go to college on a sports scholarship. As I look back and examine my life, I see that there, as we were playing Huntington in a doubleheader, Brother Clint Ezel and I were going head-to-head, and several others. I was set to pitch the second game. But in the first game, I was playing second base, and my cousin was out in center field, and we went after a ball, and he didn't call me off, and we collided. It snapped his wrist. The doctor said, "You may never ride again, son." That's what he told me. And instead of just going anywhere to play ball, God sent me over to a Christian university to get an education. You know, sometimes God knows just how to slow us down, doesn't He? To get us right where we need to be. But He's also provided some other limps. Because these limps, you know what, as we think about our lives, these things that God brings into our life, a limp means to walk lamely, especially to walk favoring one leg. When we have a limp, life moves at a little slower pace, and God brings us some reminders in our lives that we're weak. I'll be honest with you, one of the reminders that God brought into my occasion, there used to be a man that used to walk into New Liberty Church. He had a cane. The older he got, the more he leaned over. And the older he got, the more that arthritis began to take over his body. He began to lean over and lean over. But I tell you, the more he began to lean over, I saw the power of God displayed in his life even more as he would sit there. As I read the book of Romans chapter 8 to him in the hospital bed, he's laying there, leaned over in his weakness, but he's there with just a shallow breath, and he's quoting it back to me. I'll tell you, when we're weak, God is strong, and He can have an impact on our lives. And God took my grandfather away. He provided a limp in my life. There was something that was missing. I was leaning on that mighty oak in my life, but then I had to learn to lean on the Lord just a little bit more. But about 9 or 10 months later, another man in my life that taught me about the Lord, my dad. passed away suddenly one afternoon. And I'm sharing this with you because it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be weak. It's okay to talk about those things that we realize that, as Jacob would have had to say, hey, I wrestled with God all night long and I cried out, God, I need your blessing more than anything in this world. And God said to Jacob, in order for you to receive this blessing, you're going to have to be broken. And God touched the hollow of his thigh and He broke him, because you know what? This morning I would have never come to realize that God is a father to the fatherless. Oh, I'll tell you what a father He is to the fatherless. Until you lose your dad, you don't understand that. But when you lose your dad, you lose a loved one, you begin to understand that, oh God, I need your strength. I've got a limp. I can't walk. Oh, I don't know how I'm going to make it through this. Oh, but I'll tell you, when you got the Lord and you got His power on your life and you got His blessing on your life, I'll tell you, and you learn to lean on Him just a little bit more. You know what else that has taught me? It's taught me that this life is but a vapor. It's here one day and it's gone the next. I'll tell you, as I drove down memory lane, I could think about all these things and all these blessings in my life. But oh, the greatest blessing that I've had is to know that these ones that told me about the Lord, as I drove down both sides of this road and I saw loved ones, even other saints that have already gone home, it showed me that time is short, Brian, and I just need you to lean on me a little bit longer. I need you to remember that ladder, that there's only one way to glory. There's only one way, and it's not about me getting up there. It's about the Son of God coming down here and making a way that I could climb up that ladder to get there to glory. One of these days I'm going to make that final reach up that ladder and I'm going to enter into that glory land. What a joy that's going to be. But while I'm here, He's given me a limp. I believe there's several in here. You got a physical limp. You've got a spiritual limp. I'll tell you, there was a night when I found myself lost and undone. And I thought, I can make it some kind of way. I can go to church enough and I can grab the coattails of my granddaddy strong enough. I'm going to make it in there on my own. But there came a night that God had to reach down. He had to touch me in my soul. And He showed me that, Brian, you're not as strong as you think you are. You'll never be able to save yourself. But, I'm going to give you a blessing right here. I'm going to touch you right there. And I'll tell you, as a brother sang the other day, He touched me all right. And He made me whole on the inside of that wound of sin that was so deep. He touched me and He did a fresh work, a new work. He made me white as snow. And He gave me that hope that, hey, that ladder over there that I showed Jacob in his dream, and that ladder that I told Nathaniel about there in John chapter 1, that's the ladder I provided for you, Brian. All you got to do is just keep learning to lean. And one of these days, I'm going to let you climb that ladder. I'm going to climb that ladder one of these days. And I'm going to be right there in the presence of God because of Jesus. He wants us to learn to lean on Him. Jacob had a lot of things happen in his life, didn't he? Can you imagine that awful day when his sons came back with that coat of many colors and said, Joseph, your son has died. They were some liars and some manipulators, and they needed some help too. But Jacob grieved. He grieved over that son because he had been separated from him. And I believe that if I calculate correctly, maybe Joseph was around 17 years of age when he was taken off and left into Egypt. And it was about 30 years of age when he rose to prominence, and that famine was going to last about 7 years. And I want you to get a picture of this one of these days because, there's a glorious reunion going to come. I'll tell you, when we learn to lean, can you imagine as Jacob got word that, hey, you're going to have to go down to Egypt to get some food for us or we're going to die. And those brothers go down there and Joseph provides that food for them and he sends them back, and Joseph finds out that's my brothers that betrayed me and sent me over this place. And he, after a little bit of time there, he said, hey, I want you to bring my brother Benjamin up here. And then you worked them over a little bit, and eventually he revealed himself to him and said, can you go get my dad? I want you to bring my dad. I want you to get a picture of this. Joseph is a picture of Christ. Right. Can you imagine Jacob with that staff? He's limping all the way to Egypt. He knows that in Egypt there's going to be a mighty reunion with his son. He had been learning to lean. He had been grieving. You know, sometimes in this life our hearts are broken. They're filled with grief. They're filled with pain over the loss of loved ones. But I'll tell you, oh, there's coming a mighty reunion one of these days. I'm glad that there's been some others that have gone before us that have climbed that ladder. I'm glad that God allowed them to see them in their brokenness, because a broken and a contrite spirit God will not despise. I'm thankful that God shows us that we're broken and we're in need of Him. Can you imagine as Jacob there, he gets there to Egypt. I bet he probably threw that cane away there for a minute and he said, Son, I can't believe didn't think I was ever going to see you again. But oh, what a family reunion God provided. In this life, we've got a few limps. I want you to be encouraged not to be afraid of those. We don't have to be anxious and we don't have to be restless. We don't have to have it all together. We often think we've got to have it all together and everything's got to be under control. But Jacob had to find out you don't have control over all the things that you think you've got control over. You and I don't either. And sometimes we get so anxious, we get so sideways. God has to teach us. Sometimes He's got to give us a limp to show us, hey, I'm on the throne and everything's running as I see it. I know what I'm doing. I just want you to learn to lean on me. I want to close with this verse in Hebrews chapter 11. You see, there's many in here today that are getting closer and closer to that final rung of that ladder. Would you agree? There's several that are getting a little bit high on that ladder, aren't you? Amen. And sometimes the higher we get on that ladder, you know the beautiful thing about it, the weaker we become, it seems like. Sometimes we think we don't matter. But I tell you, my Bible tells me that when I'm weak, then I'm strong. I'll tell you, your presence, those that are up in age, your presence here every service, I'll tell you, it is a strength and a powerhouse of this church this morning. There are many that are still out there that are running, trying to climb the corporate ladders and trying to climb the wrong kind of ladders. But oh, what a blessing it is for you to just be here this morning by your presence to say, hey, I got to slow down. And I'm going to set my minds on the thing that's most important. I want you to hear this verse as I close. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 21. By faith Jacob, when he was a-dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph. Can you imagine that? One of the tenderest verses in the Bible, I believe, is it tells us that Joseph was there to close the eyes of his father in death. Oh, the great grace and mercy that God bestows upon us and how He reunited Joseph and Jacob. He was even able to bless the two sons of Joseph, and he says, and he worshiped, leaning upon the top of his staff. I pray that you know about that ladder this morning. The only way you're going to get to heaven is through Jesus. If you're here today and you've been trying all kinds of other ways, they're not going to work. There's only one ladder. There's only one stairway to heaven. I'm glad I'm climbing up it today. But I got a few limps. Just like you've got a few limps. There's been some things in my life that have slowed me down. If you allow them, they can make you angry the rest of your life. You know, we've got some people around us that are so bitter and so angry over things and circumstances in their life. But I want to encourage you, instead of being angry and bitter, I want to encourage you to give those things over to the Lord. Say, Lord, I got to learn to lean on You. I need You. There's an old song. I'm not going to try to sing. Brother Stapleton, he's brave enough to sing in this pulpit. I may give you the few words. I don't know if I'll break out and sing it or not, but you know this little stanza. I want to share it with you as I close. Learning to lean. I'm learning to lean. I'm learning to lean on Jesus. Finding, listen to that. Finding more power than I've ever dreamed I'm learning to lean on Jesus. Oh, it's a wonderful thing to have the power of God and the blessing of God on your life. It's okay to have those limps. Just keep walking. If you've been saved by God's grace, keep walking and allow your life to be an evidence that God has touched you. That this world may know that in the midst of suffering and pain and brokenness, there's a God in heaven who cares and who's made a way for a better country. As we get a song and sing,